Hi everyone, my name is Matt Cirigliano and I'm a doctoral candidate at NYU Steinhardt's Educational Communications and Technology program. It's my 5th year there, and during that time I've had the good fortune of working at NYU's Create Lab, which explores research on learning, games, and cognition, and the NYU School of Medicine's Division of Learning Analytics in Education. So as you can see from the title, many of the projects I'm involved in nowadays are about how data can direct design of learning tools. But the funny thing is, data, or recorded information in general, hasn't been as plentiful as it is today. Case in point, nowadays we love to take pictures. We take selfies and photos on a regular basis, but in 1900, almost no one took snapshots. Actually, most people in the world lived their entire lives without getting their pictures taken at all. And if you didn't have your name printed on a census or a birth certificate, the odds were that the only record of your worldly existence was a name chiseled on a tombstone, which is kind of creepy. But now it's different. We document every waking moment of our life. Every time we click a computer mouse, we swipe a credit card, post on a social network, or use our phone, we create data. And Google's Eric Schmidt guesstimates that the world stores as much information in 2 days as was created at the start of historical records through to 2003. That's 40,000 years of data in 2 days. It's a lot of selfies. But for those of us who want to explore data to solve real-world problems, the trick is finding meaning in all that messy data. And for instructional designers, it's a really cool prospect, because if we do it right, we can use the digital footprints of our learners, users, and patients to improve our instructional designs through learning analytics. And the better our designs, the better our creations are able to engage with users, educate them, and even help patients manage their illnesses. And there's that flow there. So a little bit about how I stumbled into this area myself. In 2010, I graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago with a master's in biomedical visualization, and my thesis explored the use of an educational comic book in a first-year class studying cell biology. So I created the 60-page book using textbooks as a guide, and the story chronicled the adventures of 2 bumbling heroes who were trying to escape a giant one-celled organism before their class's final exam. It's not quite Hemingway, but, worked with what I had. Long story short, I used a mixed methods approach and asked students to rank 23 statements from most to least agreeable, and these statements reflected their possible opinions on using the comic book in their classrooms. And what I discovered was a set of 5 distinct attitudes. So some students thought the books helped them understand cell biology, others didn't, and still others were strictly just entertained by the book. But overall, these results gave us insight on how to target select groups of learners through smart design choices and improve the comic book with data. So now we flash forward to my doctoral studies at NYU, and the idea of designing through data kind of exploded for me. I was employed by my advisor, Dr. Jan Plas, at NYU's Create Lab, and I was put to work doing research on games for learning. So, for example, Create's research explores the design of games to improve cognitive skills, like executive functioning, which is kind of like your mental command and control. Some games investigate emotional elements like color. Others are used in studies on systems thinking and in STEM education. But the most brilliant part about doing research at Create was observing the process. Because our research participants, as they played these games, every click, timestamp, and level they reached was recorded. And all that data was later used to improve our understanding of cognitive processes and ultimately how to create effective educational content. And this method is called design-based research, or DBR. Has anyone heard of it? Awesome. Okay, a couple people. Well, design-based research plays off the idea that in order to create something that functions in the real world, it needs to be tested again and again in the wild. Or as John Dewey says, where theories are judged not by their claims to truth, but by their ability to do work in the world. So it's a very pragmatic process. And oftentimes, new variables pop up during experimentation, but the aim is to develop new theories and understandings about how our creations impact learning. And not only that, but the experimenter and the participant influence the designs. So this is a simplified flow of how design-based research works. Take a look at that. First, you analyze your problems. Then you develop possible solutions with theory. Then you go through various cycles of testing, revision, and evaluation of your developed solutions. Then you reflect on your discoveries and you create design principles. You might have heard Richard Mayer. He has a bunch of those. And then finally, those results get plugged back into the whole system to refine more problems, solutions, methods, and designs. But this part here is the most interesting bit, where the data informs the design, because after all, those theories have to come from somewhere. But they don't have to come from DBR alone. They can actually come from anywhere, like the literature on psychology and cognition. For example, think back to Creates Games. Dr. Ploss is now doing research on how emotion guides and modulates cognition and learning. And past research in psychology and cognition shows that round shapes and bright colors elicit positive emotions, while the opposite don't. It's this kind of evidence-based information that can be applied to designs in DBR to test to see if they actually improve learning. And here's a bit more on that, on color. You can even expand the literature into culture and anthropology. So this diagram kind of summarizes the research on that. The three curves at the top left describe the research we mentioned before, how warm colors, saturation, and value can impact cognition through emotion. And at the bottom left, there's a short blurb on how red can cause stress during high-stakes tasks. But finally, on the right, you see this big rainbow curve, and this summarizes the qualitative meaning of different colors in different cultures. So for example, green can mean danger, envy, trustworthiness, dependent on the culture that you're viewing it through. So this is something you might want to test when you're preparing your designs for learning. So this is all ripe for design-based research, and there's endless examples of this kind of stuff out there. But I started this talk on how data can inform design, so now I'm going to share with you 2 examples of how data is implemented in improving the design of digital learning tools. First, a quantitative example. Just last year, my colleagues Charlie Guthrie and Dr. Martin Pusick and I did some research at the NY School of Medicine on the relationship between learner achievement and engagement in an online learning platform called MedU. The data was from a learning module on musculoskeletal trauma, and just under 3,000 medical students accessed the module between the dates shown at the bottom there. So many of their clicks, answers, and timestamps were at our disposal. And here is a kind of example of a relationship we're looking for. So a click on this image may impact a learner's response downstream in a multiple choice question. And our aim was to find predictive models that could reveal such relationships so we can fine-tune the learning environment with content that's most useful to learners. So here's a screenshot of the 23rd card. You can see some images and the multiple choice question and some links. And here's the general flow structure. So each module was broken down into units where multiple case study cards were followed by an assessment card. And you can see the contents of the cards there at the bottom. So once we did that, we had to look at the database of data and say, okay, what data could we use to actually create these predictive models? And these are the ones we had. And then we mapped the features on each card in a list. So for example, on card 16, that has all 4 colored squares, which indicate the hyperlink clicks, the magnify clicks, and the expert buttons, which kind of were like expert opinions. And the time spent was recorded on all cards. So if a participant was there for 5 seconds, that was recorded. And this is what card 16 looks like with all those circled. And now for a question. Okay, well, is there a relationship between student engagement and performance? To do that, to answer that, I should say, we broke down the cards into units. Then we tested a few logistic regression models, not aggression models, hopefully. And ultimately, we'll learn that engagement and performance were related. And we learned that students rushing through the cards had lower performance on assessments, which is kind of expected. But we had another question. Which engagement activities impacted assessment scores? Or more plainly, what content was most useful to learners? So to answer that, we asked an expert instructor which materials he thought would be most useful on assessments. So you can see there the darker colors means that he thought that hyperlink or picture was fully relevant to a question, and the lesser colors, or lighter colors, are not as relevant. Then we created our model. This one was built to predict what content helped students pass the assessments on question 5. And our analysis showed that only some of the activities were significant to a learner's success. So the S on the right means significance. But interestingly, some of our experts' instructors' predictions weren't supported by the models, meaning that his gut instincts about what content would help students learn wasn't always right. And you can compare the predictions here with the colors and the S's. So the lesson of all this is, as instructional designers and educators, we may not always have the answers when it comes to predicting what content will result in a student's success. So if we have a data analyst working alongside us as designers, we can empower instructional design and prove to students that studying does work. And that's a cool thing, because this kind of feedback can actually be applied to any learning environment and any kind of content. Okay, so our qualitative example next. I'm going to start off this section with just 2 anecdotes that some of you might have heard of. The first was a study done by research at Harvard Medical School who wanted to test radiologists' attentional ability when reviewing radiographs. They showed them this image and asked them to search for signs of cancer. Long story short, 83% missed the gorilla. And it's a startling example of inattentional blindness, where our brains are finally trained to hone in on one thing, in this case nodules, and filter out everything else in our line of sight. Second, a study on pigeons and their ability to pick up on visual cues. It turns out that when trained to identify breast cancer in histology slides, pigeons are just as proficient as radiologists, getting 85% of cases correct after 15 days of practice. It's pretty crazy, right? It's pretty crazy. So I mention these studies because they highlight aspects of visual attention and how we can be trained to focus intensely on learned cues, which helps if you're in radiology. But my question was whether drawing could train the eye. So how can students use drawings during radiology practice to build mental models? And what I needed was data. So to start, we designed a study where radiology students would diagnose fractures in a digital environment and draw pictures of what they saw in the radiographs before and after getting feedback on the answers. So this is kind of a flow of that. And this is what the environment looked like. It has 40 cases, and students can click on the image wherever they think a fracture is, or they can also guess that it's a normal case. So feedback pops up in the top right corner there. And as you can see here from this matrix, we had 4 different groups. Treatment 1 didn't draw at all. Treatment 2 drew pictures before receiving feedback. Treatment 3 drew pictures after they received feedback. And then the last group drew both before and after, which is kind of like a reflection group. But on top of this, we wanted to record participants dictating their actions while doing the activity to get the qualitative data on how they used their drawings to solve those cases. So in order to do that, we recorded them, and we transcribed all of their responses and coded the quotes to find themes in how they used their drawings. The image on the right is a screenshot of how we color-coded those themes. There's a ton of them. It was not fun work. And then on the left is all of those themes. So each of those themes is one unique way that learners use drawings to come up with those diagnoses. But the interesting thing is that when we looked into those themes, we found that the strategies students used were very distinct depending on whether the drawing was created before or after feedback. So for example, in the pre-feedback treatment, 6 themes were used, and the most common one was drawing to visually report what was seen in the radiographs. In the post-feedback group, however, there were 5 distinct themes, and each was slightly different than the ones in the first. Here, the most frequent strategies were using drawings as a sense-making aid, a check for completeness, and to practice the location of normal structures like growth plates. Finally, when we looked at the third treatment, or the reflection group, we saw that the same themes we saw in the first 2 groups, but most interestingly was that when students got a fracture incorrect, they were extremely likely to revise their first drawing, and their quotes reflected this. So if you look in the middle there, it says, "I'm going to draw the lines that I thought were normal so that I remember that they weren't the next time." So in cases like this, and in quotes like this, they give us a window into why participants drew the way they did. So what did we learn from this study? Well, we used our qualitative data to reveal the potential of adding a drawing component to a learning environment. And the second half of the study will tell us which treatment performed the best overall. So once we've completed that, we can hone in on the best possible place to add drawing to a learning environment like this. But the takeaway here is that qualitative studies like this can serve as usability research to get the best feedback on how learner engagement, or how learners can best engage with our content. Finally, I'd like to share a new area of data use. So 2 of my NYU colleagues and I have started a small venture called Mahalo Health, and we're currently looking at how predictive models can be used in health data tracking to help patients self-manage chronic illness, specifically diabetes. So we're currently developing a gamified health platform grounded in theory on psychology, cognition, and learning games to create a mobile tool for pediatrics so parents and professionals can monitor their child's health remotely. And this is a peek at some of the theory behind the scenes. It's super complicated, but if you get into it close, you can understand it a little bit more. And so our idea is based on virtual pets. So our current design uses daily challenges to encourage users to log physical activity, diet and nutrition data, and then that powers predictive models on the patient's behavior change and health. The big feature here encourages self-empathy, because that's a big thing with children and health. This type of thing creates a safe space and supportive space for youth to learn about their illnesses. And there's a lot of features that I can't talk about quite yet, but maybe I'll share them more with you soon. That's about it for me. Let's see. There we go. Thanks goes out to MedU and the Vesalius Trust for their support in providing research, grants, and data. And also thanks goes out to the SciViz team for inviting me to chat. Thanks for listening. You can feel free to email me with any questions you have. And this talk will be recorded, so if I went a little too fast, you can definitely pause and look at those pictures. So thanks again for listening.